Senator, on the rescissions package, the president says that he's going to oppose anybody who votes against this. What do you say to him?
He's free to do what he will do, say what he says. My vote is guided by the imperative coming from Alaskans. I have a vote that I am free to cast with or without the support of the president.
What kind of impact will this bill have on Alaska if it becomes law?
Well, I can tell you that there has been probably no issue, no single issue that has drawn out more interest across the state of Alaska than support for public broadcasting. I come from a state that is extraordinarily rural. I come from a state where access to other forms of information and communication may be limited. It may be, everything may just come by way of your radio. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is there for reason, and I think it has stood the test of time. I don't disagree that NPR over the years has tilted more partisan. That can be addressed, but you don't need to gut the entire Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is what this rescission does. So I'm going to continue to work to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Think all the DOGE cuts are done? Think again. The Senate votes today to begin debate on a funding cuts package that would claw back more than $9 billion in already approved federal funds requested by the Trump administration. Among the cuts, more than $8 billion in global health and humanitarian assistance, U.S. support for programs like PEPFAR, support for UN peacekeeping, the Democracy Fund, all could still be gone. And more than $1 billion in funding to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, also on the chopping block, which of course affects NPR. We're also learning that one key GOP vote that supported the president's spending bill may not be there for this one.
What we're getting now is a direction from the White House and being told, this is the priority. We want you to execute on it. We'll be back with you with another round. I don't accept that. I'm going to be voting no.
Joining the group chat, Maria Cardona, CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist, and Nia Malika is here with us still. So there are two things going on here. One, all the boxes, images you saw of people like walking their stuff out of federal offices, this makes that law, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Listen, there were all sorts of ideas when Trump came into the office that he couldn't do this, that Congress had the power of the purse, and we saw them dismantle USAID, the Trump administration obviously getting the go-ahead from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Supreme Court said you can fire people, and that opened this door.
And Congress just rolled over. Murkowski, among I think 3 Republicans who were saying, no, you can't take away Congress's power in this way to fund programs, to fund NPR and PBS and all sorts of public radio stations across the country, which rural voters depend on. And these are people who Trump won in many ways.
You mentioned Murkowski. We also, Susan Collins of Maine is another person people are watching. I think Mitch McConnell. But let me play for you something that Susan Collins is trying to do. Basically, she's trying to figure out if she can save a particular program, and she says the rescission package has a big problem. Nobody really knows what program reductions are in it. Could this wavering GOP support basically, signal something? Is this really wavering support? So far, these bills have passed. Right. That's just the fact.
And I think that's the key question, Adi. But I do think what it indicates is this underlying massive anxiety among Republicans as to how much this can hurt them in the midterms. Because Democrats are already seizing on all of these things, including this big, horrible bill, and you showed the polling from earlier. Americans do not like it. This, on top of that, is going to enable Democrats to communicate very clearly, I believe, and very authentically the message that Trump and his Republicans who are focused on loyalty to him instead of loyalty to their own voters, to the people that they promised they would lower prices. Inflation is going up.
Yeah, but
they're taking programs away from them that voters depend on.
Catherine Marr joins us live in the Situation Room. She is the CEO of NPR. Catherine, thank you so much for coming on. So, as we know, NPR stations across the country have been lobbying lawmakers. Do you see any signs of those efforts working?
I think that the fact that we are having this conversation right now and the fact that the vice president had to come down to the floor of the Senate last night to break two ties to move this bill forward to debate today is an indication that people are listening. Absolutely. This bill threatens the coverage of public media coverage for 13 million Americans. And we have heard from folks from Alaska to Nebraska, Alabama to Maine about how concerned they are about what might be to come.
As you know, 50 Republican senators voted with the vice president, he's the vice president, the president of the Senate, so he can break a tie, voted to advance the bill. The final bill, as we've been noting, takes place later today. Are there any specific senators you're focusing on just ahead of that vote?
Well, in fairness, we're talking to any senators that will listen, of course, because we have stations in every state in the country, 246 member stations, as well as hundreds of music stations and public television stations as well. But I think that the place where we're seeing the most traction is senators who represent communities where there are large rural communities, large tribal communities, in particular in places like Alaska, where there just isn't a lot of other options. Broadband service is not universal, and heck, even cell phone service is not universal. There's a real understanding of the need there, as well as for emergency alerting, in which public media plays an extraordinarily important role.
What do you say to Republicans who argue the funding is a waste of taxpayer dollars and consider your outlet to be a biased propaganda machine?
Well, I would take those two things apart. Number one, 70% of all funding goes directly to local stations. NPR receives 1% to 2% of national funding on an annual basis. We're talking $3 million, $5 million. It's not much. I think, unfortunately, this is cutting off their constituents' noses to spite NPR's face. It doesn't help anyone to take this funding away. As far as the accusations that we're biased, I would stand up and say, please show me a story that concerns you, because we want to know and we want to bring that conversation back to our newsroom. We believe that as a public broadcaster, we do have an obligation to serve all Americans, and we need to make sure that our coverage reflects the interests and perspective, and we hear from Americans across the political spectrum. That's important to us, and we want to make sure we live up to that.
Catherine, explain to us what happens to the local stations all around the country if these cuts pass.
I mean, I think that we could see as many as 80 stations shutter. We saw a report from Senator Cantwell's office on the Commerce Committee that indicated that those are the numbers that they are looking at. These are stations that receive more than 50% of their funding from the federal government. Again, tribal stations, rural stations primarily. Beyond that, you'd see the stations would probably start by letting go of local journalists. We already know that there's a crisis in local news in this country. 20% of Americans live in a place without local news other than public media. And then I think the next thing to go would be universal coverage. Right now, public broadcasting covers 99.7% of the country. Places that commercial broadcasters just won't go or can't go because it's too expensive to maintain that infrastructure. You'd start to see that coverage degrade as well, and you'd be punching holes in a national infrastructure map that has served this nation for more than half a century.
What about the stations in the bigger cities like Washington or Chicago and New York?
Well, it's important to support those stations too. They are independent local journalism. And at a time where we have excellent national journalism coverage, we know that. We're sitting here on one of those broadcast networks. We have excellent national newspapers, but we don't necessarily have really strong local coverage. I know this as a resident of the city of Washington, D.C. It's hard to find the person that is covering my transit map changes. Stations like WAMU here in D.C., they do that kind of work. New York, it's the same. You see that across cities in the nation, especially mid-sized cities like Kansas City, Tallahassee. These are stations that fill a critical gap that don't otherwise exist.
Yeah, I love NPR. Before I joined CNN, I was a regular guest on some of the NPR shows.
I'd love to hear that.
It's a subject
Absolutely.
close to my heart. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.